Hey everyone! Welcome back to another episode of Adobo and Avocados. My name is Marie, and today I have two amazing individuals. Let's start with, hopefully I get this one right. Yes. This one.
Should hope so. Hi, I'm Nicole Mendoza van der Hoeven. I am a developer advocate at Grafana Labs and just a general all around testing and technology nerd. And I'm really happy to get also personally introduced to our guest down there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name's Nicola Martin. I'm head of quality engineering at a company called Adarga. We're in the AI and data science space. I also volunteer quite a lot. So if you ever see me post on LinkedIn, it's usually for the British Computer Society or WomenTech Network. For the British Computer Society, I am chair of the special interest group in software testing. So that it's normally called SIGIST. So we advertise quite a bit now that we've got quite good at marketing. So we advertise our stuff quite a bit. You'll see us on different networks. We usually hold events, or we generally comment on stuff. So you'll see us pop up every now and again. And it's a really lovely group. And I really enjoy doing lots of volunteering in the women in tech space as well. So yeah, that's me.
Amazing. So I first met Nicola. I think it was a panel group discussion. I remember Callum was there as well. So
Yeah.
Callum, who was also a previous guest at Adobo and Avocados. And then we also did the follow-up panel about quality specifically. So I've known Nicola just from like interacting with her. So it's really great that you've agreed to be a guest as part of Adobo and Avocados. We always like to ask the same question to all of our guests because I think
Wait,
it's
aren't you going to
important.
ask how I met Nicola?
5 minutes ago. Okay,
I
Ours
Nicole.
are
remember
really
it
short.
like it was 5 minutes ago. It
Yeah.
seems like I've known her forever, but no. Hi, I
Oh,
just met Nicola. And
I
I'm
mean,
very happy to
yeah,
meet you. But sorry to interrupt you, Marie. The
no,
question that we always ask
yeah,
every guest is the reason that we call our podcast Adobo and Avocados is that adobo is a Filipino dish. Marie and I are both from the Philippines, and adobo is kind of like the national
national.
dish.
Yeah,
But it also has these connotations of like it being comfort food. It's also great leftover food, like whatever leftovers you have in the fridge, you make it into an adobo and that's what you have. So it's like easy to make, something that you can always have with you despite being in another country or something. It's like a little taste of home. So the
mm,
question is, what is your adobo? Like, do you have a dish, or maybe it doesn't have to be food, it could be something that you do that brings you comfort.
Oh my goodness. Well, I was thinking of food because you just said avocados, and I fully admit that it's probably my absolute favorite food in the whole world.
Oh,
oh,
awesome.
I've just thought about how many have I got in the fridge at the moment. I think I've got about 6. I never
oh
run
my
out,
gosh.
so it's my
Yeah,
favorite thing, and if I run out, I panic. That and
yeah.
custard as well. So I never
Oh,
run out of those 2 things. But actually, if I was thinking of a comfort food, I just thought of Caribbean food straight away, but then immediately went to, like, Jamaican food in particular. So, many dishes. I don't think I'll pick one because I might insult
yeah.
somebody or upset someone, and you'll just get comments about my food choice. But anything, from my mum's side, Jamaican food, that's comfort for me. So
Yeah.
my mum doing any cooking for me, the rare time she does it now. She used to cook for us all the time. Now she barely does. She's looking after her health and everything. So that
Mm,
kind of food is comfort because it's probably quite bad for you
yeah.
because it's full of fat. But yeah, that's to me comfort. But also um, hugs from my son. Like today,
No.
he gave me a hug when he was going into class, which is a rare thing now. He's 6. He doesn't want to give me kisses and hugs outside class anymore. But I got one this morning and I thought, oh, I miss
Oh,
those. So,
yeah.
I love a hug from my little boy. Yeah.
Oh, that's so sweet. It's great as well because mom's food is always the best food, isn't
Yeah.
it? Like
Absolutely.
it is like the comfort food. So Nicola, I'm curious to know. How did you get into tech?
Wow. Okay. I will preface this by saying before I was in tech, I was actually a conference organizer.
Oh,
So
wow, I didn't know
That's
that.
awesome. Was
yeah,
it tech conferences?
no, not at all. It was actually like government related
Mm.
conferences. I worked for the Confederation of British Industry. We've been in the news for quite naughty things recently, but it was a huge job for me. Straight
Mhm.
out of college, I decided that's what I wanted to do, and it seemed like a good path. So I stayed on it for about 3, nearly 4 years, and then suddenly decided I want to do something different.
Yeah.
So, end of the 90s, I walked into an agency in the days where you could leave work on a Friday and not have a job, basically say I'm giving up my job, and on Monday morning walk into another one. So that's exactly what I did, and it
Wow.
happened to be in a large pharmaceutical company. Not maybe great, but at the time they were offering me a role in a tech team, and it was basically being a product administrator or project administrator. That was it. Yeah, project administrator, and it was barely tech, but it was in a very big tech team, and we had business analysts, systems analysts, administrators, all kind of staff you can think of. We had them within the team, and
Mm.
myself and another person coordinated everything that they did. And so doing that for a little while, I realized I really loved understanding what jobs they were doing. And actually, one of the architects on the team decided they were going to, we didn't put a name to it then, but it was actually mentorship. And they realized that I had a lot of skills. When they would build something, I would actually be testing it without realizing it. So I was doing user testing because I knew how other staff in different teams might use the software. I was actually doing testing without realizing that I was doing it before they would roll that out internally to other staff. So the person who mentored me, actually mentioned that to me, that I was doing that. And I said to him, never heard of it. Never heard of it as a proper job. How much do they get paid?
That's an important question, yeah.
I'm
Really?
thinking I'm not leaving my admin job for something that's not going to pay, and I've got bills to pay. I had rent to pay. I'd moved out at 18. I needed to pay my bills. So, he said, no, it's okay. You'll be good. I think this suits your mindset. You have this kind of analytical mindset and it works. And this is something you should consider doing. So I looked into it and realized, my goodness, this is an actual career path. It was, big career path back then. So that's what I did. And straight out of that job, I got another one that was testing related, and I never really left until I started contracting and I realized I could do lots of different roles in tech. So I've been project manager for a while. I've done BA roles a number of times, and that helped me to understand, to me, what I felt were different mindsets. And also working in those roles helped you when you were testing, because you could see things from different viewpoints. And then also bring those skills into testing. But then I decided on testing and I actually really loved it. And all the roles I got offered after that were related to testing, working on some pretty high profile projects, doing fun stuff too. So at one point I worked for Sony on PlayStation and PlayStation 2. And getting games and taking them home, and consoles to practice on and try things out on, and testing websites that went along with the games, and it was just fun. Yeah. And
That's so cool.
yeah, and then it just goes on and on from there.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
so
I think that's
fascinating,
like the
yeah,
dream,
to hear.
to test games.
Yeah, that's every yeah. It's
But
such a
then going
really
forward, games testing didn't pay as much as other areas, so in other industries.
Interesting.
So I just came out of that because I thought, well, if I wanted to continue doing that, it wouldn't pay the bills. So ultimately what I would think of at the end, can I go on holiday if I'm being a games tester? I would love it, but could I pay the bills? And but then I often like to do really complicated projects. So things that I could really get my teeth into. And I found some projects would be too easy, but the reason I contracted and did consultancy for so many years is because I had a choice a lot of the time in what projects I did and who I worked for. So when if I think about the fact I've never worked in tobacco or for tobacco companies or oil companies and things like that, maybe I think I made a conscious decision, or gambling companies, things like that. I never did that. So I could always pick what I was going to work on, and it would be really interesting when I did.
It's so fascinating in terms of your career progression, because now you're head of quality engineering in Adarga, and I think Adarga is like an AI based company, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken. So just from hearing you talk about your career progression, it's really it's such an inspiration, if I'm being honest, because the reason we have this platform is to, share to people that there are a lot of different career pathways, there are different ways to get into tech. And with your story, like, you just went to look for a job Monday morning, and then you tried like different things. So it's just always amazing to hear like really amazing stories. I
Yeah,
guess
thank you.
my I guess my main question is, as a woman in tech, as a I guess, in terms of like your experiences, because you've been in the industry for a long time, have you had any, I don't know, like, experiences that stood out? Because we have to admit that the current state of, the women in the tech industry is not really good. And um one of the reason that maybe you're into the public advocacy and speaking is to also get a lot more diverse people into tech. So from your personal experience, were there any times or experiences where you're like looking around and you think to yourself, gosh, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of women in tech? And yeah, just maybe talk a bit about that more.
Yeah, I think for me, it was coming towards the end of my consultancy and contracting time. I think I realized that 10 years, coming up to the 10-year anniversary, really, I thought I've been going from job to job to job. I'd take a little break maybe, but not much. And I just kept thinking, every time I go to a team, I rarely see now people like me, just women in general. Because when I first started testing, you would see women on teams. But it just seemed that as jobs went on, I got so used to working in all male teams. And I never questioned why that was. I just made the assumption when I got to a job, the majority of people will be men. If you had women on teams, they didn't work, in as engineers, developers, none of that. They probably worked on the periphery, maybe doing delivery stuff. They were not,
Mm.
classed as proper tech. And I never questioned it. And then as I got to, I saw changes in, obviously, we went from kind of working on predominantly waterfall projects to agile. And so I think for me, the main changes I saw were around 2016. I don't know how quickly it happened for people in permanent roles, but in the contract market, it changed nearly overnight. And the request for skill sets changed nearly overnight. And then also there was this sea change, I think, because the expectation was that you were more technical than maybe people had been. And there was an utter panic in the contract industry about people not being skilled enough to continue being contractors in testing, for example. A lot around automation at that point, because people wanted to automate rather than be manual, which was absolutely fine that the market was changing, but the skill sets of people within the industry wasn't catching up. And it, for me, was a point where I also realized that the people who were not really that technical or were not able to get those jobs where they were requesting more tech experience were women. And then I realized, well, hang on a second, you've predominantly worked in these teams all these years that were just pretty much male dominated, and your managers have always been men, even though you contract, you don't really have any kind of line management as such, but you reported in to mostly men. I'd say 99.9% of the time. And, why is that? Why were women not there? And so in about 2019, I had some major shift in my life outside, but it also made me think about giving back and saying, well, I've managed to do all of these things. Maybe I can do something to try and change the narrative for other people, change their thoughts about how they're working so that we could try and get women to stay in tech, because that was another thing. That massive numbers of women were leaving UK tech industry anyway. And there were these questions about why. And that didn't really start until a few years later, so in the lockdowns. But for me in 2019, I really wanted to try and do more, especially within the test industry, to stop the kind of, I was also seeing the same faces all the time for conferences, was talking at smaller events. There were not really any online events at that point, but, I just wanted to be able to do more. So I joined Sigist on a train home. I phoned into their AGM and they had a role free. And I said, okay, I'll try it. And I was voted in. And I've never left. And so it was, from there, my volunteering just went up and up and up, because before that I had volunteered as an online volunteer for the UN. And I'd also done a bit of volunteering work for Widowed and Young, an organization that deals with young people who lose partners, for example, and they needed websites and things. So I helped with a bit from a BA perspective. For a while, but that's all I'd really done in the time that I had free, because I had a baby and it was a lot. But as time went on, I just ramped it up, and all of my spare time goes to volunteering pretty much right now, and I love it. Being able to give back is amazing, and just being able to understand from speaking to people through mentorship and coaching, even from the BCS side, but also privately, I really get to understand what it's like for women working on all different roles in different teams, and just their experiences. I can remember being like that sometimes when I was contracting, but actually realizing there was no one to help me, nobody to speak to. And I just managed to just absorb it all.
Mhm.
And I just became super resilient during that time. But I realized that it's different times now.
Yeah, I think you, in terms of the volunteering aspect, like, I have to admit, it's such a, like, commendable act, because I've always seen the posts that you have on LinkedIn, and it's, I think it's paid off, because you are always present in terms of, like, the Women in Tech Awards. Like, I think you were a finalist, or you even won, like, one of the
Oh no, I've
women,
been
like,
nominated twice this
yeah.
year, 3 times this year actually. So I've got, at the moment, there's the Computer Weekly Most Influential Women in UK Tech. So I've
Yeah.
made top 50 last year. I've been in Rising Stars previously, which seems weird because Rising Stars people assume is for younger people, but it's actually for anybody entering
Yeah.
tech, and it's the same in other Rising Stars things. So nominate people who have been in the industry a while but don't get any, mention. If you see that kind of competition, please do put people forward. But I've also nominated for Women of Tech Excellence as well, for Role Model of the Year in Tech. I have to remember, and Woman of the Year in Tech. Yeah, so 3 nominations thus far. It's kind of like the
Amazing.
awards season. I'm always grateful, but I do the work. So, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, I just want to do the work and see the benefits in people being happy in their jobs and being happy in the industry, so much so that we don't see the numbers going down. So when the ONS said that earlier this year, the number of women in tech had fallen again, I was like, oh, what do we do to change this? We have to really be more active now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the volunteering has stretched to things like UN Women UK and their CSW volunteering that I did this year, being a delegate, an online delegate for that, and going to hundreds of events online in the space of 2 weeks, and listening to all of the stories from people from all over the world around how they're using tech or how tech is benefiting them, and just being able to continue that work with that group. So I
Mm-hmm.
feel like we really need to be activists right now, sitting
Yeah.
behind keyboards, not keyboard warriors, but actually being active and doing something to make change happen.
It's
What
really
have you?
difficult
Yeah.
though, right? Because it's very, it sounds exhausting just to hear you talk about it, and I have a great deal of sympathy because there is a part of me, and I know of Marie too, that really wants to see that change in the industry. This is our industry, and I would like for there to be more women and people of color
Yeah,
and just diversity in general. At the same time, and all three of us have put ourselves out there in the hopes of being that change that we want to see. But
yeah,
now I feel like it's going the other way, where now I feel a big deal of pressure to consistently show up. And it is also, as you're talking about it, it's easier for me to spot in someone else than it is in myself. But I'm like, it is not your job or your sole responsibility to single-handedly enact this change.
yeah.
And that's just something that that can be quite difficult to struggle with, wanting a change but also, needing to be a full person on your own.
Yeah. Um, I don't really, I mean, because I don't know how it happened that I managed to just find things. I think I treated the volunteering the same way that I've treated um, contracting roles before. So I will always navigate towards something that nourishes me and makes me feel as if I'm going to make a good, a good change here if I'm in this team or I'm working on this project. Oftentimes I will actually approach groups if I feel like I could benefit them, or it would be something that would be good to work on because it fits in with things that I'm currently working with, or if I can connect groups together, then I do that. Because I get offers all the time to do things. I get offered, no, I get offered the chance to speak. I get offered the chance to, join groups. I can't do it all.
Yeah.
So, I have to be quite selective, but I'm also very selective in, will this actually do something or get women to notice, or non-binary individuals to notice that there is an actual future in tech for them if I work on this thing?
Yeah.
Will me being prominent actually help to encourage people to go into a career in tech? So I do like to do a lot of stuff with organizations that work with schools where I can. So the Women's Engineering Society, for their engineering day this year, I went to a school. Funnily, it happened that the school actually approached the organization. They were doing something with another company, and it happened to be a school that was pretty much up the road from where I was a teenager. So I just thought, I just said to people, I've got to do this. I've got to go to this school. I've got to speak to these kids. So I ended up speaking to nearly 200 kids, I think it was. And, afterwards they came up to me and they were saying, we never thought about careers in tech. And I thought, why not? Why is nobody doing this with you? Nobody's giving you ideas and things like that. So some of them were actually on LinkedIn, the older ones are on LinkedIn. And, they were connected to the company who were there on the day doing work. So, I, kept in touch with a few people. And it was just amazing to see the interest, people asking me questions. If it was easier to get to work with schools, I'd absolutely do it more often, because if we can capture their interest earlier, I know we could absolutely make sure that people were going into computer science, engineering, and then, obviously thinking about doing tech roles. not just your normal engineering roles that people are, more familiar with.
Yeah. I think most of these issues really stem on how women and men are raised. And I've been reading this book called Brave, Not Perfect.
Is
And
that for the book club too?
yeah, and I've always had this book for ages, but I haven't had the time to read it, and then now I have the chance to read it. But it's like I'm just on the early few chapters, and there's a lot of things that I remember from my childhood where my mom or my aunties would say, "Oh, don't do that. That's not very ladylike." Or, "Oh, make sure you're always well behaved." Or, "Oh, you can't run." So there's always a lot of things that girls can't do. We're always being taught that we always have to be perfect, and then that if we make mistakes, it's not seen as very good. But then if you look at boys, like they're just free to run around, free to try everything. And it's just such this ingrained feeling because we've been taught about this in such an early age, and sometimes people don't really realize that that is the effect of all those different like upbringing.
I can even tell
So
you a story that
yeah.
speaks exactly to that, and it's about me. So
Yeah.
the first time I actually spoke about this publicly was I was in Global Tech Advocates Voices in the Shadows 2 book last year, and they've got a newer version that's out this year, but I was in their book last year, and they asked to write a page about yourself. What, if you could speak to yourself years and years ago, what would you say? And so I had to write about the fact that when I was in school, I from a 5 or 6, my mum was posting letters for me to NASA in the States. I had full intention of going to space camp back in the 80s. My wall was covered in posters of galaxies, stars, all kinds of stuff, planets. I've even got pictures in my mum's like photo albums of me in my room on my bunk bed and all the posters behind me. And I only wanted from about 6, 7 to be an astrophysicist. That's all I wanted to do. I studied every science subject at school, but I had a physics teacher who hated women. I just now realized, years later when I grew up, I realized he just didn't like us. There were 4 of us in the physics class, and he insisted that none of us would pass. None of us should even consider roles that in science, or he said certainly not in physics, because it's not for women.
Mm.
And he would tell us that every week. Now, if you're doing GCSE for 2 years and someone's constantly being negative to you every lesson you have with them, it embeds on you. And I had this impression that if I didn't pass, if I was so bad at the exams anyway, because I was a very anxious child, that it made me physically sick to do the exams. And when I didn't pass physics and I struggled with the other ones, it was like everything he said to me all those years came to pass. So all my dreams of doing physics at A level and going on to university and studying to be an astrophysicist, gone. And
Mm.
I decided, okay, well, I will just do anything. And that's when I decided. I did media for about 6 months, hated it, and went to work. And that's when I became an organizer, conference organizer. And I just felt like everything had been lost. So being able to switch into the tech lane a few years after that
Yeah.
really helped me to think, okay, I maybe can do something. It's not what the full science role I wanted, but maybe I could do this. And I still say now, because my mum's doing a PhD and she's 64, right? So she's in her final year actually. But I always say to her, I'll be 60 when Rue's gone, he'll be here probably still, but anyway, I will finish off my degree, because I started my degree again. I will
Mm.
finish my degree, and I will, probably become a professor or something. So I'll be this really eccentric old lady that teaches astronomy or something somewhere. And that's what will happen. So I'm sure that's my future that I see before me. But that, it is important that, the way that we raise children, the way that the inspiration needs to come early. They need to see people like them
Mm.
doing things that maybe they've thought about doing. And I know my first job choice wasn't tech, but I fell into that, and there were no role models for me to look at then, because we didn't have, wide use of the internet or anything like that. People weren't posting every year saying these are inspirational women for you to look at. Right
Mm.
now we're in Black History Month, and there are posts going up everywhere with inspirational women, but we didn't have that as teenagers. Well, I didn't, and certainly didn't have that to look to and think, well, they had a hard time, so maybe I can make it still. I should have
Yeah.
continued trying in my 20s, and I didn't. I went straight to work and fell into an industry that wasn't really what I wanted to in the first place.
Yeah. Speaking of role models, I was at a tech meetup last week, and we didn't get the chance to do a panel after the talk. But I remember one of the planned questions was around, who was your role model, and I was really thinking hard in terms of who is or who was my role model, because, like you said, growing up, I didn't really see anyone who looks like me who works, in tech. um so I feel really, happy that now I work with Nicole, because it's the first time, and I've worked in the tech industry for 10 years. It's the first time that I've worked with someone who looks like me, who's Filipino, and who's also do, amazing stuff. So it's 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 really amazing now that at least we're finding like role models and people, like amazing people in tech who, now fits into our categories, because you're right, before it wasn't really there.
Yeah, yeah. And it wasn't really there. And even now, when I think about for Black women in tech, there are lots of people who run tech organizations,
Mm,
but their background isn't really tech. So you can look to them as role models in terms of what they're doing for women in tech. But I can't, say necessarily there were Black women in testing that I look up to, you know, and I don't have that. So
mm,
I look at people who are doing things right now, and I think to myself, I'm so happy that you're doing it, because in the future, this generation are going to have
yeah,
loads of role models. They'll be spoilt for choice. And
yeah,
as long as they're being prominent, I'm boosting them, reposting their stuff, and I just love it. So it's good.
yeah. So maybe now we can move on to the main topic for this live stream, and it's really about how AI is impacting, gender equality. Because I remember I read that article that you wrote, that you posted on LinkedIn about the impact of AI in terms of like gender, and how technology and how education can really, help in terms of shaping like someone's view in terms of, the gender equality. Maybe you can talk about, like, from your experience, like what have you noticed nowadays, because AI is seen as this good thing, it's making our working lives simpler, but then there's also the other side where it's a bit dangerous. There's a lot of stuff that maybe if we're not careful, because the people behind these AI models, if they're not diverse, then that can lead to another problems. So you could maybe talk about how AI is impacting gender equality nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying earlier, that's why I was really interested in this year's um, UN conference for the Committee for the Status of Women. It's the 67th meeting, and they were looking for people to be online volunteers as such. So I applied, and I think 3,000 people got picked eventually for the UK alone. So you can imagine globally what that was like.
Yeah.
For me, the reason was because their theme this year was around equality in technology. And, being able to look at it not just from the perspective of being someone that works for a tech organization, but as a user as well. How would it be for other people using technology around the world, and for women and young girls in particular? And, being able to go on that event, the 2 weeks of events, I should say, there were side panels and other, parallel events that were being run around the main conference. It was amazing to be able to see the way that for certain groups, these, technology is impacting them. And especially the conversations I specifically went to events on were around AI, or generative AI to be more precise, and just about how products are being built. And certainly that's my leaning. I lean towards wanting to understand how the products are being built, how generative AI is being used in models, and also trying to understand what impact that has. So I have presented previously to Royal Academy of Engineers, for example, or WomenTech Network Global Conference on bias in AI, but from a quality perspective, and always giving examples of where it has, effectively failed. And I'm actually seeing more this week in the news. But certainly, I think people have been, I don't know if you want to call it, more hyped around this whole generative AI thing, with obviously Chat GPT, and other things like Bard, for example. And then it's also allowed them to see the mistakes. So mostly the things that people are probably more familiar with are where they might use a platform to try and find to create a picture, for example. And then that, image comes back and it doesn't look as they would have expected. So, there's tons of bias in there, whether that's around gender or mostly racial. And I know you shared the story about the Barbies, which
Yeah.
was really mind blowing to me. But it's not something that we haven't seen. There've been other examples of that, but I guess the Barbie movie raised this for a lot of people around the fact that you've got Microsoft's platform, for example, that if you put in certain searches, you were getting back typical stereotypical pictures of people, or you've put in CEO and you were getting back pictures of white men. So it's again affecting women constantly, and impacting young people, more importantly, about how they're seen in the world, or what they could achieve and work towards. And it's not a good thing. So companies need to work on making sure that they're trying to remove as much bias as possible. I always say they could never remove all the bias, but ultimately if they're buying these models off the shelf and they're not really aware of what's been used as training data, that's an issue. You need to be aware of that. AI regulations will come in very soon, and there'll be an expectation on companies to ensure that they understand the data that's being used in their models. And there's just lots of examples of where it's gone totally wrong in society. I've talked about the hand dispenser that a hand soap dispenser, it's not hand dispenser, soap dispenser, that when you put your hand underneath it, it recognized light colored skin but didn't recognize dark. And that's a simple thing, and no one would ever dream that there'd be anything racially problematic about a soap dispenser. But this is where we are. AI models are used in so many things. If they're trained badly, you get bad results, and that ultimately means your customers are going to be unhappy, and ultimately it has an effect on society as a whole.
I think it's also indicative of the paradigm shifts that we're going through. The first kind of programming, the one that we're used to, is more imperative. So people specifically say, do this, then that. And the computer just goes down, every row and just does exactly what people tell them to do. And that has the advantage of being utterly predictable, because there is a logic to it. Then the next stage would be more declarative, where now we see this a lot in DevOps, where now we're not telling services or computers exactly what to do. We're saying, "Hey, I just want to get here. I
Yeah.
don't really know what you have to do to get to that point." So already there's like a little bit of leeway, but you're still defining, here are the parameters that you can play with, get me to this endpoint. But now where we're at is what you mentioned. We're in the stage of generative software, where now you have a list of inputs, maybe a rough sense of output, but nothing nailed down. And we don't have that end goal like we have for both declarative and imperative types of software. It's kind of just like, here are the parameters, go. And we
But
don't
even
know
then,
what's
those
going to come out of
parameters are
it.
not even the parameters that people are using. This, you know, we talk about prompt engineering, but how many people are actually training in prompt engineering? There's an element of, when we talk about the data and AI models from the perspective of the public, we talk about data literacy. But there's also another side that we need to be thinking about, and it's the training of engineers, developers, whatever you might call yourself, and even testers to that end as well, about what do we need to be doing internally within our companies to make sure that we understand the software that we're trying to build. What training do we need to have? Ultimately, it needs to be, at this point, something around prompt engineering and understanding what we're asking this system to do. And so when we're being very careful about the things we're asking it to do, and then being very knowledgeable potentially about what comes out the other end, because there's still an element of testing that needs to happen in that stage. It's just all very black box, and feels a lot of the time when I speak to people as if it's like dark arts at the moment. We don't really know what we're expecting, because we don't know what the AI is going to think about, going to push out as results. But then you get the results out and everybody just says, oh, we got results, and not going to look at it too much because we bought it off the shelf. We're just not really that fast. As long as the thing works, the model works in the product that we're trying to put out, it will do bare testing, barely any testing on it, nothing really major, and hope for the best. Now that goes out to users, and we end up with problems like we have in hiring staff, where software is fully being biased towards people from certain backgrounds or schools that they went to. We end up with the soap dispenser issue. We end up with all kinds of issues around facial recognition, and I could just keep going on, but there are loads, and things that you would expect to work better and be tested more strictly just are not. And that's why we end up with these problems in society.
Yeah, and I also think that we're used to being able to test for that end result, for that
Yeah,
outcome, and
yeah,
knowing like this is what we expect. But with generative software, we actually don't know where it's going to end up,
yeah.
and we don't realize, or a lot of people still haven't understood, that we really need to focus on the input, because the quality
Mhm.
of the output is going to depend on the quality of
On
the
that
input.
input. Yeah,
And we
Yeah.
talk about things like GPT-3, which has like 175 billion parameters. And then now GPT-4 is supposed to have like a trillion. And yes, that makes it much more accurate, but accurate in terms of what? Like, what's the yardstick that
yeah,
you're measuring that by? Because it's not possible to have that much input be quality input. What they're
Yeah.
taking that out of is like the internet in general, and they're not really applying much, human empathy to determine what is good input. You can't with a trillion different little parameters that they're putting into the model. It can't be quality. And that's actually more dangerous, because the internet is highly subjective and biased and racist and sexist and all those things. Just the fact that most of the internet is in English, that's
Mhm.
already a huge bias that has,
yeah,
social, political, cultural implications, not just linguistic. The fact that just to be able to get into this industry, the number one thing you should learn as a non-native English speaker is to improve your English. That is a bias. That's
Mm.
that's something you can't get away from.
Yeah, the impacts on the public are absolutely
Mhm.
huge. And again, this when I'm for me, the conversations I have when I talk about this now, and I think about it from a not just a testing perspective, but from a quality perspective, so more wider than that. And I think that our roles will change quite a lot if they've already started to change, to be fair. But our roles will change quite a lot, and there'll be more of an expectation on us to have a say and be more involved much earlier. So when these models are being built, or even before that, when they're planning out what these models will look like. But also we can get involved in things like ethics. So if you have an ethics committee or group within your organization, you should really try to get involved in working with them to understand what their pillars for quality, if you like, or for ethics are for the company, for the organization. But also you can look at, say, the government website's got lots of information about, they're quite transparent, the UK government, you know, they're quite transparent about how they work on their models, but also around their ethics pillars that they use. And looking at those, trying to make sure that that's applied, because the big thing that we need with models is more transparency, and that's
Mhm.
around the data being used, that's around how they're being the data's being input, and what the outcomes are and what the expectations are on those outcomes. And we need more transparency around that from organizations, but there's nothing really saying to them right now legally that they have to do that. So eventually that will come. It's just,
Mhm.
I mean, I did big data with an MIT professional course back in 2016, and it talked about, rather than being very technical, it talked about the implications for big data on society, and also talked about ethics, but said, there was nothing anywhere really. People weren't doing ethics at that point, weren't really focused on that, but it was ultimately something that was going to come up. And here we are now,
Yeah.
and we are really talking about it because it's very important, in order to make sure that generative AI and the outcomes of that are fair for everybody.
Yeah. I like to think of it as similar to accessibility because nowadays everyone is talking about how important accessibility is when it comes to creating your websites, whereas maybe if we rewind this back like 10, 15 years, like it's not really important. Like when I first started my career, I didn't think about doing accessibility testing, and now it's really something that I always prioritize. And speaking at conferences or attending at different conferences, there's always a topic or a track or a workshop about the importance of
Yeah.
accessibility testing. So I have hopes, like high hopes, that yeah, this will be the same for generative AI. Like in the future, we'll be at conferences and people will talk about the ethics. People will talk about the implications if we don't focus on having quality inputs, the impact to the society, the impact to cultures as well. Because the AI generated images for that Barbie show,
Mm.
um, so BuzzFeed actually wrote this article, and this was aligned to basically hype, the movie in terms of the
Yeah.
marketing, but they received a lot of criticism that they had to take down the original article. And there's a lot of misrepresentation in terms of the appearances, and much worse, like the culture representation, that if people who aren't aware of what the culture is from that country, now they have that perception that, oh, this is what women are like in that country, and
Mm.
that is so bad.
Do you
So
want to
it's
show that?
yeah, okay, let me just
They
share.
even referred to things like whitewashing in that article. And,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just insane when you think about, the movie was meant to be lighthearted and fun with, some
Mhm.
serious messaging running through it. I saw it. I thought it was fantastic. And
Yeah.
I've never liked Barbie dolls and didn't like
Yeah.
dolls as a child. Um, but I actually really enjoyed the movie and took a lot away from
Yeah.
it. But the impact on other things that, since then, including this article. I was really surprised to read it, but actually not surprised considering the things I've talked about in presentations this year and
Mhm.
last.
Yeah. So this article that I'm sharing, so this isn't the original article because BuzzFeed's article was already taken down. But yep, this is how Singaporean women are supposed to look like, Vietnamese women, and one that I'm really shocked is Philippines. And I'm also mad that they spelled Philippines
Yeah, it's
incorrectly.
wrong. But
Yeah.
they all just look like Miss World or something,
Yeah.
It's not. It's
Like
how would
I've
what would
never
they have
seen a Filipino,
put
yeah, who
into
looks
this
like this.
what would they have put into this model to make it think that this is what people look like
Yeah.
or should look like, or the Barbie doll should look like?
Yeah. And I
I
think
think the
this,
dangerous
Oh, I saw
part
these
is
ones.
the
Yeah,
assumption
yeah.
that this is accurate enough to actually put out there.
yeah,
I mean, it's
Yeah.
fine if artificial intelligence or the machine learning has limits, like every technology has limits, but
Mhm.
it's the fact that they didn't know that this was a limitation. They
Yeah.
just kind of assumed, oh, whatever it spits out is going to be accurate.
is this one
That's the
holding a gun?
problem.
Sorry?
Is that a gun?
Yeah, yeah. That's the that's
I've seen the African pictures that they had, actually, because they had other countries as well,
yeah.
and it just assumed that the complaint for the pictures was mostly this is what they expect everybody from each of these African countries to look
Mhm.
like. Nobody actually mentioned a gun in the complaints I saw.
Yeah.
So wow, I've just noticed that just now, and I'm just like
Yeah.
mind blown. That's just
Yeah.
crazy.
And this
But
is
also,
the
like,
thing, yeah. Oh,
if you
sorry.
scroll back to the Philippine one, I
Yeah.
also take issue with the fact that, like, this is the whole, Asian eroticism thing,
Yes,
where
yes,
as an Asian, you're either, like, a dragon lady, badass person that can beat everyone up, or you're this overly sexualized,
yeah.
overly feminine, submissive kind of Asian, and it's like, do you think that we just dress like that all the time? I mean, you know, the African one went kind of the Sudanese
South
one
Sudan,
went the
yeah.
other way where she had a gun. But
Yes.
this is also just as damning to think that we're just there to be displayed. That's
Yeah.
what that says to me.
Or that's, the other one is like saying that Sudanese women are only, involved in war and fighting.
Yeah,
Mhm.
That's
yeah.
Yeah.
crazy. Because when you think about the Barbie film, they had Barbies who were, president,
Yeah.
I don't know if it was of the US, I can't remember, but physicists and things like that,
Yeah.
doctors. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was
The movie was
it's
really good,
crazy.
and I think like the movie really did try its best to cover, a lot of the important topics that we're talking about, but it's the other companies, especially marketing companies, who have tried to ride on that hype wagon. And like you said, like they just care that they're getting results
Yeah.
based on like the inputs that they've provided, and they don't really care if those results are harmful. They probably think, oh yeah, it's for fun, it's fine. But there's just that other side of this whole picture where now people might have this misconception that women from Philippines look like that, women from South Sudan, looks like the ones that we saw, but it's clearly inaccurate.
And then maybe that's, you're raising a good point around the marketing, right? So the actual creators of the AI are, or no, let me go back a step. The people who made the film, the story, it was a story. Beyond that, the marketers have really gone from like the peak of it, obviously, was the Oppenheimer thing.
Yeah.
I can't remember what they called it, but having seen both films, I can see why they did it, and it was fun, and that marketing was great. But then it seems to have gone off a cliff, and we've got the outcomes of other companies trying to, get clicks and likes, etc. And they have really not cared what they've used to do that. So they've
Mhm.
used the most. What can they do to shock people right now? They can put out controversial generative AI that will really get people talking, shouting at screens, and reposting their stuff everywhere. That's for the clicks and likes and the attention, essentially. And that's something that we probably need to, as a society, deal with next. It's not just the companies creating the generative AI models and the products, it's the offshoot of that. And the marketing companies have got a real, as the young people say, chokehold on us at the moment, because they are pretty much running the show. We can actually see the strength of marketing people within tech, actually, because you talked about earlier about winning awards and things like that. But mostly, if you look at the awards that are being won, it's actually being won by marketing people a lot of the time, which is a really interesting thing. A lot of those are not really won by people who are truly in tech. And that might be controversial, but it's true. That's changing now. But where we now see with the the models that are being built, again, it is the marketing companies who take that stuff forward and spoon feed this stuff out on the web and into X and whatever other platforms people are viewing their news and their content on. This is what we're seeing. The upshot, the peak this year, I think, has been the Barbie film and all the stuff that's come out afterwards, and it's really got people talking. So in one way, it's great, but in other ways, it's been very negative. And I don't know how we stop that, because this seems to be the model most films, big films, will use going forward to try and get that impact again.
Mm-hmm.
Has either of you heard about the Bechdel test for
No.
movies and fiction? It's something that's used mainly in film, and it is supposed to be a very quick, simple test for whether or not there's accurate representation for women in particular. And in order to pass this Bechdel test, a movie has to have three things, and none of them are very complicated. One, it has to have at least two women in the movie. Two, they have to be named. They're not just like a wife. And three, they have to have a conversation with each other about something other than a man.
Oh, wow.
That's it. And the amount of movies that do not pass that is horrifying.
Oh
You know,
gosh.
I recently just watched the D&D movie, Honor Among Thieves. I'm
Yeah.
a big D&D player, Dungeons and Dragons. There were two
Oh
women, they were
wow.
named. They
Yeah.
never had a
I watched
conversation
that,
with
and I'm
each
about to
other.
watch it again, so now I'm going to be watching in
Yeah.
detail. Oh my goodness!
It was always about a man.
Oh
Wow.
And that's
wow.
just like such a simple thing. You know, they're traveling together as a party. There are two women there that are named. They never have any relationship with each other. The two men do. The men do with the women, but the women don't have any sort of relationship, adversarial or
Wow.
otherwise.
Oh
And
I'm
that's
gosh.
watching
just
it again this
horrifying.
weekend, definitely.
That's
Okay.
shocking. Yeah, I need to watch
Wow.
it now.
But I also think that this is why it's so frustrating when the internet is just scraped without any regard for quality, in terms of inputs for AI, because anytime you do that, you are choosing American culture. You're choosing their values, their politics, their history, because the internet is predominantly not just English but American. And
Mhm.
that has to come with disadvantages. It would for any, even if that were any other culture, you know. But it's a problem when people don't take that into account. When Americans have this entire movie culture of things that don't pass the Bechdel test, or things where Asians are always like they have the rebellious Asians hair streak, or they're submissive and secretly sexual and just need to be brought out. You know, there are these like tropes that occur again and again in the culture, and it's just really frustrating to have one culture chosen specifically over everything else.
Yeah.
Mm, gosh.
Sorry, I got into a bit of a rant
No,
there.
you're right.
Important. Yeah.
Even you're talking about the internet and the data that's been scraped. There was an idea. I'm sure I'm not in trouble for sharing that, but it was during the UN CSW conference. We had a day where we all met a lot of the other delegates. So I think there were nearly 500 of us or something like that there on the day. And we were split off into groups, and we had to think about things that we would want to do
Mhm.
around the subject of generative AI and how we could make positive change in the world. And one of the things that somebody came up with was like a day of activism, flood the internet with tons of terms that were related to women, positive terms, and just do that all day, everybody in groups all around the world, just do that. Because eventually that the models would pick up this data and it would change the way that they worked. Massive thing to organize, you know, if you could ever do something like that. But it's an idea about the fact that, you know, the data that people are using is being picked up by some of these
Mhm.
models now, and it's being used. So the negative stuff that you see online all the time is also being included in that. Flood the, you know, the web with stuff that's positive about women and
Yeah.
non-binary people and just groups in general, and it would pretty much change the way that, you know, the data that's being used.
I
Yeah.
have another suggestion too. Change flood the internet with content in other languages.
Yeah, that
So
too. Exactly.
Mhm.
yeah, because that changes everything.
Yeah.
You know, I think it has to start with our language. So it
Yeah.
has to be, we have to prioritize language learning in schools. I think it has to start there, because learning another language isn't just knowing how to express yourself in a different way. It's finding new things to express your thoughts about. It's thinking new thoughts entirely.
And it's
And
understanding a different culture to your own.
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that that's something that we need more of, even in tech. I mean, regardless of what language or culture you come from, you still program in English, which
Yeah.
sucks, frankly.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
Cool. We are out of time, but Nicola, if there are any groups or resources that you can share to everyone watching this in case they're interested in learning more about AI and how to, have better, I guess, like input, how to have better algorithms. Are there anything that you can share with us?
So I'm really into at the moment the Algorithmic Justice League, just the name alone.
Oh,
But they're doing a lot. They're very active on LinkedIn and probably on other platforms. They've got their website as well. And they're doing a lot around, you know, dispelling the myths and also speaking on a lot of conferences as well. So you'll see people from the league talking at events. Um, I've actually got a link on my LinkedIn, so I'm not sure if anyone watching this will even get to see my LinkedIn. But there's a link for the He for She summit that happened a couple of weeks ago, or about a week and a half ago, actually, through the UN. And there was a great talk there about generative AI and its effects on society. So if you can find it on YouTube, it's the He for She summit, and that was really excellent. There's about 15-20 minute talk in there with a really great panel, and that's really good to watch. There is the Algorithm Watch, Black in AI. They're all groups that you could also follow as well. For me, anyway, they're groups that I follow. For Humanity is another one. They work on the mostly around the AI regulations that are coming in and making sure that people are trained as auditors so that they can go into organizations and hold them to account, basically, and make sure that then they're being compliant. But there's training that you can actually do to become a regulator. I'm sorry, not regulator, to become an auditor, and you know, to carry out that those checks and balances within organizations. So yeah, For Humanity is another website to look at as well. Yeah, that's it.
thank you. It's been so great to meet you and to have you on to talk about this. I feel like it's something that never gets talked about enough.
Yeah. I'll
Mhm.
reach out to you after this just so that I have all the links and then we can add it as part of the video description.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
but yeah, I echo what Nicole said. Like really amazing to have you and thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. It's been fun. I love talking about stuff like this, but don't normally get to speak about it from people with a quality background or development background. It's mostly to people who have no real interest in the actual creation of these things, but are just interested in everything generally. So it's really nice to be able to speak to people who are, developing, and we need to get more developers involved in these conversations.
Definitely. Amazing. Well, this is it for today's episode. We'll be back again next week. But for now, yeah, thank you and have a great day.
Bye
Bye bye.
everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.